we're probably at the end in Ukraine. It's just a matter of moments, days, weeks, whatever, that people recognize it and all agree that we need to talk. I mean, we got Ukrainian troops surrendering now. Most of these soldiers speak Russian, if not as their first language, then a second language. And so it's working. Why should you die, says the bullhorn. You know, why should you die? You're going to die if you keep fighting. Come, we will feed you. We will water you. We will treat you well. Don't believe what you've heard. And they're surrendering.
Larry, do you think that Russian would cross the Dnieper River? In your opinion, is that possible?
That's the big strategic question right now. I've talked with a couple of others about it, and we all agree that it's highly possible, but we're not in agreement that it's probable. Because if he crosses the river, then he's probably going for Odessa. And I mean, you could cross the river and just sort of stop, and then that way you would have the river as a negotiating point. But I don't know. I don't know.
Larry, the other thing would be how do you see right now in Ukraine? Do you think that we're gonna see a military coup against Zelensky and his administration? Because the situation is so fragile right now in Ukraine.
And made that way not just by the crowd around Zelensky or the leadership group in general, but also by NATO and all the different views that are being foisted on him, probably by everyone from Macron to Stoltenberg, and can't forget the Germans too. I wouldn't want to be him right now, but he has shown a remark. One of the individuals I was having the conversation with, he's shown a remarkable ability to survive. Were he to suddenly change and be the advocate of peace and the advocate of a decent negotiated settlement, ceasefire immediately, and then a decent negotiated settlement where Ukraine keeps, the fundamental parts of its country, he could be a hero. He could turn it all around. He's shown the kind of skill. I won't call it political skill. I'll call it human relations skill. That is part of political skill, but he's shown it in the past. Maybe he'll show it again.
But here comes the question, is the Biden administration willing to go along with negotiations or even peace talks?
There's the question, because you got to eat, at least behind the scenes, if not publicly, you got to eat a lot of crow because you've made so many statements and you've said so much is important and dependent on that appropriation getting through the House and all these other statements you've made. You just negate them in one fell swoop. And people start saying, well, why did he say that? Why did he say this? What's happening now? Did you tell me what we're negotiating? That's an abrupt change, and a brave, courageous man with no real dependence on a second term, in the sense that I'll die if I don't get it, would take it and run with it. But not Biden, I don't think. I think Biden, a second term for Biden has become sort of like a passage of right. It's got to happen. I don't think he cares if he lives through it. He just wants it. He wants that second term. He wants the glory of having won a second term. And that's tough to fight, because that becomes nonsensical. It becomes illogical. It's all about emotion, and it's all about political emotion, which is the most dangerous kind. But maybe he'd surprise us too. Maybe he would become the peacemaker. I mean, if they both could latch onto that and invite Putin into a similar arrangement, I think Putin would be willing to do it. I mean, he's not going to stand up there and say, I want peace so badly, I'm making peace, blah, blah. But he would be a reasonable negotiator, I think, because he wants this to stop too. So if reasonable minds, that's what diplomacy is all about, supposed to be. If reasonable minds prevail, you could have some bluster and, exchange a few blows in the beginning and make some preposterous remarks and then sit down and start talking.
Right now, we've heard that, as you mentioned, Ukrainian soldiers are surrendering, and even Azov battalion, that they were far right part of army,
Don't want to
when
fight
it comes
anymore.
to them, it's over. That's
Yep.
why I think the situation is so serious right now.
Yep. Very serious. And if we don't recognize it, and we, primarily Washington, but the others too. I was listening to Cameron talking about Gaza today. What an idiot he's become. But basically us, Schultz, Macron, Stoltenberg, other Brussels luminaries have got to accept this, and they've got to start serious negotiations and don't carry their pride on their forehead, as it were, as they go into the negotiations. Don't be trying to get one up every time you turn around. Try to get a good settlement for Ukraine, a decent settlement for Russia. After all, it's been bloodied heavily also, and a good settlement for Europe. A good settlement for Europe is the simplest one because you want it to stop and you want the war to be over. And you want whatever is to result with those disputed areas to be monitored by the UN and kept peaceful while it's happening. Those are the major things you want to happen.
You remember last time we talked, Lukashenko coming out of meeting with Putin, he said that after May 21st, Putin will not sign any agreement with Zelensky. That could have two meanings. First, he's willing to do this as soon as possible. And the other one would be, he's not willing anymore to work with Zelensky, and he wants someone else in power in Ukraine.
And the only person who could probably change that latter connotation, if it is indeed the one that's relevant with Putin, is Zelensky, by being far more forthcoming and amenable than Putin ever expected. That would probably take Putin by surprise, and it might even change his mind.
The other thing that we've seen during this crazy weekend that we had was this response from Iranian army to the attack. It was a retaliatory attack on Israel because Israel has attacked Iranian consulate in Syria. And right after that.
Yeah, that was the first thing Cameron made an ass of himself with, comparing the two and saying there's no comparison. That, under international law, is Iranian territory. And oh, by the way, David, did you know that people were killed in that strike? Did you know that strike was out of the blue? No one knew it was coming, not even the United States. Iran announced theirs days in advance, gave the United States warning, told the United States through the CIA that they would not hit any U.S. installations or any U.S. assets in Israel. And then didn't kill anybody. David Cameron's a fool. He's like the rest of the NATO leaders and would-be leaders. They're fools.
When it comes to this attack, from what we've seen so far, we know that Iranians talk about this attack days before, 3 days before attacking. They were talking, they were in contact.
It was very finely orchestrated. And the fact that they didn't kill anyone, and the fact that they hit only military and intelligence targets with that many aircraft flying around, RPVs, and it's just a phenomenal. It demonstrated, and I'm sure there are some Israeli military personnel who are significantly worried now, because it showed they had an incredible ability to calibrate and orchestrate a massive strike that did exactly what they pretended it would do, just hit military and intelligence targets, did not kill anyone, and was a reprisal for what Israel did in a very much more blatant fashion and did kill people. It was a study in precision strike, well orchestrated and calibrated to send signals, not to kill people. And it was also a very big strategic statement. I do not want a war with you, Washington. I'll take a war with Israel, but that'll be up to them because I'm not going to start it. They look like they want to start it, and they look very much like they want you to participate, Joe. I mean, they're not stupid in Tehran. They don't want that to happen. They know they'd be on the losing end. I think, seriously, we'd all be on the losing end.
3 waves of attacking: drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. How do you see the whole situation militarily?
I see it as being very expertly done. I see what all they gained. I see what Israel and we lost. I would dare say that the Israeli missiles expended were well over $1 billion, and those that we provided probably added another billion. And maybe the Iranian entire complex of missiles that hit, and I understand they did fire 5 or 6, probably just to test them, of their latest state-of-the-art missiles. They weren't aimed at any significant target. So I think the Iranians got a whole lot more intelligence and information about Israel out of it, and to a certain extent about the United States and Jordan and other assets. I think I told you the last interview, I discovered that Germany is now the #1 provider of killing instruments on the battlefield. So they got a lot of information on a lot of people's goods, but principally on Israel's, as you indicated. And that was probably part of their purpose. And if they ever really do have to unleash everything, I think it will probably be in concert with maybe 150,000 fired in 50,000 missile tranches from Hezbollah at the same time they fire. And anybody that thinks that they can't coordinate that kind of attack so that it comes down roughly at the same time is just smoking cheap stuff, because they can, and they proved it with this. So you do that, and you have just overwhelmed Iron Dome. You've overwhelmed all manner of other air defense assets, and you have penetrated majorly, and you're going to do a lot of damage and kill a lot of people. And that was sort of the signal, I think, that the smarter people in the Israeli Defense Force took from this. I heard General McKenzie come on, former Central Command commander. In my mind, a perfect example of what's wrong with the U.S. military leadership today. He's basically an idiot. But he comes on and I'm sure he was delivering a prescribed message. Oh, this didn't do anything. Israel proved how effective its air defenses are, everything. It was just a major, major effort by Iran, major effort, and it was completely and totally thwarted. Right, General. If you believe that, I don't want you commanding my baby carriage. And that's the way I've heard other American generals talking about it who want to weigh in from time to time. That's not really what the Iranians did. The Iranians showed what they could do. They showed what they could do if they picked up the pace, as it were, and they began to use some different things. And they also probably showed what they could do if you shot back at them. As a military professional, I really want to, I don't want to test it, but I want to see what the S-400s will do, because they come so highly praised, better than anything we've got, the Russians say anyway. And it seems like the Turks think the same thing about them. So go ahead and shoot back at the Iranians in a similar kind of dense array, and let's see what they do to you. Let's see what they do to any airplanes you might send that way, although the Israelis simply don't have the tanking capacity to go that far with manned aircraft, except to go on a one-way mission. And they could do that. They could do that, crash land in eastern Iran or Azerbaijan or someplace like that. But they don't have the legs to do it with manned aircraft. I think it's a little bit more even game now. Now, anytime the United States jumps in full force, it's not. Just from Al Udeid, you could saturate Iran. We'd lose a lot of airplanes, and it would be a shock to the U.S. Air Force, but we'd lose a lot of airplanes. But you could saturate in 2 or 3 carriers if we could get them out there. We're having problems sailing our ships these days. We don't have enough sailors. They're breaking. I don't know if you saw about Boxer and Wasp. We can't put an ARG out there. We can't put a Marine Amphibious Force out there because we're. So I'm not going to say too much about what we could do, but I do think initial waves anyway would be devastating, and the Iranians know that. We're still back to the same old game, and I'm happy to see that Biden was intimating at least that we weren't going to be in on this. That's what Netanyahu wants. He wants the United States to go in whole hog and to rescue his little butt because he's in trouble. He's losing in Gaza. I mean, if you really look at the situation in Gaza, he has lost, as anybody with a strategic brain knew he would. What do I mean by lost? Well, he said he was going to annihilate Hamas. At best, he's probably attributed them by 10, 11%. And that's going to be announced, of course, as what he wanted to do in the first place. Whether he goes on from here and does more in Gaza is going to be interesting because he's halted now for enough period of time where I think he's probably got some serious logistic, manpower, and other real world problems in addition to the strictures being placed on him as they are by Biden to worry about. So I don't think he can go much further in Gaza. So now the question in my mind becomes, well, okay, if this is it, maybe we're going to see a little bit more and then that's it. When is Ben-Gvir going to start striking the settlement tents and building his settlements in the northern part of Gaza or wherever he's going to start? And when are we going to see the real essence of what this was all about? And what's that going to mean for Netanyahu? Is he then going to say to Ben-Gvir, I'm sorry, you're not going to do that because the big guy over there, our sugar daddy, is telling us we can't do that? I don't know. But I do know that that's the purpose. And I think what Netanyahu hopes happens is this just sort of fades away. And maybe this confrontation with Iran and maybe a little confrontation more acute with Hezbollah, maybe that's going to mix in here to kind of make Gaza sort of recede a bit. And then we'll just be back to where we were, which I said before is what I think we're headed for. We're headed for another government, a Likud government, running Israel into the ground and treating the Palestinians and non-Israeli, non-Jewish Israelis very, very badly, third, fourth class citizenry, and just building up the angst and the anger again and having another go at it 10 or 11 years down the road. That just seems to be what we want in Washington. Let's quieten this down. We've had a genocide now. We'd like no more genocides. Come on, let's do this. And then we'll just go back to the status quo ante in this case. That would be pitiful. But I think that's what we do these days in this country.
We know that right after this attack, Joe Biden was talking with Netanyahu and he said he's not supporting any response from Israel to the attack of Iranians.
Good statement.
Yeah. And here comes the question, is it going to influence Netanyahu's vision toward responding how they're going to respond to Iran and this attack?
I'd like to think it would mean something, and I suspect it does, but I don't know just how much. And by that, I mean, he's just apt to say, I don't think Biden means it. And if I can get myself into a deep enough morass, Biden will rescue me. No question in my mind, he will rescue me. But it needs to be a pretty deep morass. So maybe I ought to do something fiercely bad with regard to Iran or Hezbollah, or God forbid, both. And then the United States won't have any choice. Let's see what Joe does when I hoist him upon his own petard and light the fuse. That's Netanyahu. You have to remember, though, and I pinch myself sometimes to make myself remember, nuclear weapons do have a certain deterrent effect. And anytime Iran, Hezbollah, any potential enemy for Israel who is not a nuclear state, or even one who might be a nuclear state like Russia, contemplates an action against Israel that might not be really, but might be deemed by the Israeli leadership as existential, threatening the very existence of the state, There's no doubt in my mind they will use a nuclear weapon. More surety there than with the United States. Israel will. If for no other reason than to go out with a bang, because that's the way they think. And that's dangerous. That's extremely dangerous. And Tehran knows that, and Amman knows that, and Cairo knows that, and Beirut knows that. All these people, Baghdad, they all know that. And so they got to be very careful with presenting to Netanyahu in particular, but really any Israeli leader, a moment where they think it's existential, because they will push that button. Even if it doesn't mean winning, it just means going out with a bang, they will push that button. That's why we were going to put that sign up right outside Tel Aviv saying a Jewish state is dangerous for Israel. Because we firmly believe it. And we have more American Jews in our group than anything else.
Do Iranians have any sort of nuclear bombs?
My very educated, because I spent probably at some moments 10, 11 hours a day on the North Korean problem when I was in state. When I became Powell's chief of staff, he said, is there a particular portfolio you'd like to bring up with you from the policy planning staff? I said, yes, Korea. He said, done. So I watched it very closely, almost on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis. One of the things that I think I learned from people like Sig Hecker and the nuclear physicists we sent to Yongbyon, and from others who formed our team, Bob Carlin, a whole group of people who were really experts on the peninsula, far more than I. But I was more or less the military professional in there. And one of the things I think I learned about nuclear weaponry in general is you do not want to ever even insinuate you have a nuclear weapon, an operable nuclear weapon, which means a warhead mounted on a missile, and the missile will transmit that warhead to someplace with some sort of accuracy. You know, you could carry one in a suitcase, yes, but that's more or less a terrorist act. That's not an act of a state. State might be behind it, and you got to test to do that. So we put a lot of money in our satellites, in our airborne sniffers, and that's about all I can say. A lot of assets to detect their tests in North Korea. And the very first one we were really worried about, because the seismic center, where is it, in Sweden or Switzerland maybe, came up and said, no, we think that was low, maybe about 1.5, 1.2 on the old Richter scale, whatever. We don't think that was nuclear. So we, put those planes up there and sniff the air, see if we can detect any radioactivity in the air that shouldn't be there. I shouldn't be talking any further than that. But we figured out that they had indeed tested a low yield weapon. It didn't explode to the extent of the yield. It exploded only partially, which is, I'm not a physicist, so I can't tell you exactly what that means. It just means it didn't burn properly. It didn't explode properly. The second one did. And so they made progress, and you could monitor that progress. And then the next thing we looked at was, okay, are their warheads competent enough to carry this? Because if it's a uranium produced bomb, it's very much different for warhead adaptation than if it's plutonium. Plutonium is smaller. You can hold it in your hand if you got a glove. And so we watched that. It's an elaborate process. We watched the reprocessing facility for the uranium and the plutonium. Then they got it. I mean, they had it. And now we know they've got it, and we're trying to guess how many they've got. And I don't have my clearances anymore, so I don't know how good we're doing on that. But I would suspect they probably have upwards of 50 or more now. And they have warhead technology from the Russians. Thank you very much, Joe Biden, for pressuring South Korea, because the next thing that happened was Kim Jong-un went to Moscow and they made a deal. And now he has the very best plutonium and the very best warhead technology. Thank you. Now he can hit New York with his ballistic missiles. Whereas before, he might could have got one to California and wouldn't know exactly where it was going to hit in California. Now he can hit dead center Times Square. This is what happens. It hasn't happened with the Iranians. All to say, it hasn't happened with the Iranians. And if you say, well, it's happened underground, like maybe your confidant has told you, I would say, okay, yeah, because the North Koreans taught the Iranians how to go underground and how to be very sophisticated about their underground operations. But they haven't done any of those things that the North Koreans had to perforce do in order to get to the point that they got to. Could they have a really lousy one that might be about halfway there and they're going to take a chance on it and put it on a warhead and shoot it? Yeah, probably they could, but I wouldn't do that. Not after all the elaborate things I saw that could go wrong with regard to that kind of procedure. You want to be really careful till you get up there to the point where you can mount it on that warhead and then put that on a rocket and shoot it. And I don't think they're there yet. Are they close? I think they probably are very, very close. I think they're closest with the uranium, enhanced uranium. That's a little bit more difficult when you go to the next stages, but are they close? Yes, I think they're close, but I don't think they have one yet. And I frankly think the NIE in 2006, 2007, I think Paul Pillar was involved with that, or some of his former intel experts were, that concluded the Iranians had not made a decision to build a bomb, was accurate. Now, that was a long time ago, and a lot of water's passed under the bridge since that time. But I think they still have a hang-up about going the final step.
When it comes to the response on the part of Israelis, do you think at the end of the day they would attack Iran?
My sources tell me right now that the voices in the War Council in Israel that are being listened to most attentively right now are those that are recommending that if a strike from Israel does occur, and it's quickly done in response to this one from Iran, it will be at their militias in Syria, Iraq, or wherever. It will not be inside Iran. That's what I'm hearing.
Somewhere like Hezbollah?
Well, it's a different ballgame there. I think that's a different theater of war, if you will. I think that's one Netanyahu's saving for orchestration if he gets truly, truly desperate. He's been leading it right up to the brink. And Nasrallah and Hezbollah have more or less been doing a tango with him. You know, it's been tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. No one wants to go up that escalation ladder to the point where, 50,000 Hezbollah really competently fired missiles come into. You want to see a mess. You wouldn't even have to join in if you were Iran proper. You could just let Hezbollah do it, because I'm told they have somewhere between 150 and 180,000 of these missiles. You will see very quickly that no air defense capability in the world can stand that. It'll be overwhelmed. Those missiles will hit. They will hit wherever they're aimed, in cities, towns, villages, military installations, airports, airfields, ships, harbor, port, Haifa, oil terminal at Haifa. They will hit all over. And many of them will get through, no matter what. Jordan, Egypt, the United States, France, Germany, Britain, no matter what we do, Israel will be really hurt. And that's dangerous. That's very dangerous. And they won't be able to defeat Hezbollah after that happens, in my view. Can they reconstitute and defeat them? Probably, possibly, especially with our help. But that's not what Israel does. Israel doesn't take a defeat, lie down for 6 months, reconstitute, and come back and beat you. Israel gets angry, gets existentially threatened, and goes out to Dimona.
Here comes the question, how much Netanyahu is willing to risk the whole country on this battle, on this conflict between Iran and Israel? It seems to me that he's so desperate right now with the situation in Gaza. I think he sees this situation, this new conflict between Iran and Israel, as an opportunity.
I like to think that it's something like Millie chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Trump. That Benny Gantz is sitting there and others who might be called of the same mind with respect to the Palestinians and Arabs in general, but have a sane part of their mind too, who would detect this sort of last ditch move by Netanyahu and either slit his throat or get rid of him. I mean, he'd wake up in the morning and he'd be dead. I mean, after all, that's what he did to Yitzhak Rabin. I think there's that kind of check on Netanyahu. I hope there is. I don't think they'd all agree to suicide simultaneously. I might be wrong. I might be wrong. You remember Masada? Remember when the 10th Roman Legion was down there and all those Jewish fighters were up there on the top on the tableland and they all committed suicide?
We know that the Israeli lobby is so strong, and on the other hand, we know that Biden is not willing to continue this type of escalations, this conflict between Iran and Israel. He said that. And do you think at the end of the day, who's going to be the decision maker in Washington, the Israeli lobby or Biden?
That's a hard question to answer because thus far it's been the Israeli lobby. When you see, what university was it? Southern California, I think. When you see a Palestinian valedictorian, and I'm told she is really a valedictorian, it's not some soft discipline she's a valedictorian in, it's astrophysics or something like that. She's the valedictorian. And now they won't let her speak because she's Palestinian or Arab. I can't remember. I think she's Palestinian. And she had posted some remarks or something that were in support of or a little bloody-minded maybe with regard to Israel vis-a-vis Gaza, which you could certainly understand. And I don't think she would get up on the stage and say that. But now they're all pleading because a lot of people are aiming barbs at them now, the university leadership, but they're all pleading that it was all about security, that it would be too insecure for the other students there. Someone would get angry, bring a gun. Well, that's what we do in America every day, is get angry and bring guns in and kill people. So why is that a reason that this woman can't speak? She worked, how many years has she worked? And she's valedictorian and she's not going to get to speak. That's how stupid we are. And we do these things. We do these things because we are stupid. And you can't fix that. You just can't fix that. It's you know, I'm hoping, I heard yesterday that Julian Assange may get a break. My God, that would just blow my mind away. There is some decency left in America, but I don't count on it.